Hey guys, it's Brian Weaver, disciple, speaker, facilitator, and one of the questions that I've been getting in the midst of coronavirus 2020 is actually about centering your marriage and managing expectations. What does it mean when our roles change and how we have to do life together changes, as many of us are certainly facing with stay-at-home orders and having to move our office to our house and still have the kids at home while they're doing schooling and working on learning their new routines and everything else. So this is a great opportunity for me to speak into this based on the whole principle behind center your marriage is really living out Ephesians 5:21, which is submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then Paul goes in to talk about the marriage relationship, how wives are supposed to love, respect, and honor their husbands, and how husbands are supposed to love their wives as Christ loves the church and gave himself up for her. So, center your marriage, managing your expectations is really an easy opportunity to talk about what it means to live out your role as a disciple of Christ and to do so in a way that honors Christ, brings glory to Christ, shows that He is Lord in your life, as well as loving and respecting and honoring your spouse as the person that He has given to you. So just a couple quick notes. Be sure to check out my website, journeydiscipleship.squarespace.com, as an opportunity to learn and to find out more about presentations and workshops and other opportunities I provide. That you can be a part of and as well as gain some new information, and then like and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Those are some of the best ways that when I push out content or quick ideas or videos or things like that, you can certainly grab those on there. So reality check as we dive into this. Number one, we all have expectations that are real or unrealistic, and those expectations come from our own personal experience and background and our dreams and desires, as we'll talk about in a second. But just understand that all of us have expectations in a relationship. None of us is in a relationship that we don't have expectations on the other person. Secondly, we will all fail to meet other people's expectations. Hands down. I am a sinful human being, so are you. And because we are sinful human beings, we will always fail to meet others' expectations. The same is also true, though, that others will fail to meet our expectations because, again, we're all sinful human beings, and so if I fail to meet other people's expectations, they certainly fail to meet my expectations. So the sooner that we can just deal with that reality, the easier it'll be in this conversation. And then finally, we all have a calling from God. All of us as disciples of Jesus Christ have a calling and a responsibility and roles to live out according to that calling and that purpose. And so as we talk about expectations, it's important that we don't forget that aspect of it. That when we put expectations on other people in the relationship, it needs to line up with what is their calling, what is their role in as a disciple of Christ, and what does that mean in the midst of our relationship. So, expectations. All right, here's some quick definitions for you. Expectations are my dreams and desires of my spouse based on my perspective. See, that's pretty important for us to remember is that expectations in a relationship may be real or they may be unrealistic, but nonetheless, expectations are based on my perspective of the relationship and what I think my spouse or whoever I'm in that relationship with, what I think they should be doing. And so as we center our marriage, living out Ephesians 5:21, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, I really need to keep in mind what am I trying to put on my spouse in our relationship that isn't necessarily true to her role. And see, that's the second definition here is that roles are what God has called me and my spouse to live out in our relationship. And they are based on God's truth. Compared to expectations, which are based on my perspective, roles are what we do as disciples of Christ. What is God actually calling us to do? What is the purpose He's asking us to live out? Those are based on what we find in God's truth. So how this plays out, how you manage expectations in your marriage is one, you have to voice it to your spouse. Okay, you have to actually share what you're struggling with, or maybe where you feel like they're not meeting your expectations, and you have to have that conversation of why. Okay, why do you feel like they're not meeting your expectations? And to be able to have that portion of the conversation, you have to be able to measure your expectations against God's calling for them and for you in your relationship. So what I mean by that is if God is calling them to serve in His kingdom and to serve in His kingdom in such a way where they have to travel 3 weeks out of 4 in any given month, then an unrealistic expectation that you would place on your spouse in your relationship is that you'll have a date night at least once every week. Okay? If they're gone for 3 weeks out of 4, and you have kids in the house, you have responsibilities of chores to do around your house, all of these other things, then it may be pretty unrealistic to expect a weekly date night. But it wouldn't be unrealistic to expect a monthly date night, right? Do you see how that plays out? So measuring your expectations against what God is calling them to do as his disciple really gives you an opportunity to say, hey, is this a realistic expectation that I have on my spouse, or is it not? And then you have to evaluate that regularly. Okay, so what I mean by that is everything in life happens in seasons. Some seasons are like 2 weeks long, some seasons are months long, some seasons are years long. But everything happens in seasons in life. And so there was a season in my marriage with my wife Victoria where we had 4 children in our house. 2 of them were infants. Okay, so this was about 2 years ago. The girls were just, Esther and Naomi, our twin girls, had just been born. We finally got them out of the hospital after about 3 weeks. We brought them home. It was definitely going to be a very unrealistic expectation of my wife, given the calling that God had given to her to be a mother of infant children at the time, of infant twins. It was going to be an unrealistic expectation for me to say, hey, I expect to have a 3-course dinner every night. Now, I would never expect that of my wife because, again, we have 4 children in our house. And on top of that, I don't know that my wife enjoys cooking that much. But it was a very unrealistic expectation if I were to say, Victoria, I expect to have a 3-course dinner. I expect our house to be sparkling clean. And I expect to have clean laundry every day. She's trying to mother infant twins as well as the older 2 children that we have in our house. And so that's what I mean. Now, those twin girls have grown up. There are going to be 2 here at the beginning of summer, and Charlotte, our middle daughter, is going to be, our oldest daughter really, is going to be 4 at the end of the summer in August, and Elijah, our son, is going to be 6 here in April. And so now it might be a little more realistic of an expectation that since she stays home with the kids, while I go to the office and go to work, it might be a realistic expectation that we have dinner at home every night. Okay? Now, some nights it's not. But that comes from voicing and communicating as a husband and wife that she can say, hey, tonight, can you just pick something up on the way home? It has been crazy. I can't do this. Okay? I change my expectations. I change based on the season, based on the circumstance, based on what is happening. As a husband trying to love my wife as Christ loves the church, I have the opportunity to change my expectations so that my wife always succeeds. See, that's really what it comes down to in the marriage relationship, is submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, is so that my spouse always gets the better. They always win in the circumstance, right? And they win out of God's grace and mercy pouring out through me. And so that really helps as we talk about expectations and managing those. Is am I putting unrealistic expectations on my spouse, and by doing that, is that a burden to them? Am I giving them undue frustration, undue stress that's only going to hinder our marriage relationship? But to even really figure that out, I have to voice my expectations. And then I have to be willing with my spouse to measure them against what God is calling them to. What is he actually asking of them as a disciple of our Savior Jesus Christ? And then we have to evaluate that regularly. Is that realistic right now in this season of life, where 10 years from now it may be very realistic? What is happening in our marriage? What is happening in our household? What is happening around us that we can have realistic expectations of each other, and we can evaluate that based on what's happening. I think for a lot of people that's been a struggle, especially with the stay-at-home orders and having to move your work meetings to your home and your home office, especially if you have kids in the house where kids are wanting your attention. Your spouse may be wanting support and help with the kids who are demanding attention because they have work to get done, or any number of things is taking place. All of it comes down to being able to communicate. This is what I desire out of a relationship. This is what I understand God may actually be calling us to in this moment. How can we do this together? All right, so here's some simple next steps for you is, 1, identify your realistic and unrealistic expectations in the relationship. Everybody has them. Do you understand that? right? So as a couple, as a husband and a wife, talk about the expectations that you actually have, and try to do it in a way that doesn't cause anger and frustration to arise. Because again, realize your expectations are based on your perspective, your perspective. And so that means that it's open to discussion. That means that it's open to being true or not true. And so you have to be willing to measure that against what God is actually calling of them in life as His disciple. So identify the realistic and unrealistic expectations, and then have that real conversation with your spouse. It doesn't do any good to listen to this video and then never actually have a conversation with your spouse, right? I'm not in your relationship. I'm not in your marriage. And so having that conversation with your spouse is vitally important. Victoria and I've been at home working for about a week now. And Victoria and I finally had to have a real conversation about what it meant for me to spend time in the office, right? I was trying different things. I was putting unrealistic expectations on myself that I could get work done while also help out with the kids. And at the end of the day, we had to have the real conversation that office time for me has to be separate from the rest of the house. All right, and so that has actually worked out really, really well since we've been trying to do that. Is now I have a realistic expectation of what it means, and my children also have a realistic expectation of dad, knowing that when he's back in his office, he's working. We can't bother him. We got to leave him alone. But when he comes out, hey, he could be dad. He can hang out with us. We can go play games. We can go ride bikes. We can go work on projects, whatever the case may be. But it's having that real opportunity, that real conversation with your spouse, so that you can manage the expectations. Get this? Together. You can actually manage them as a husband and wife. And if necessary, seek advice, counsel, or professional help. Because at the end of the day, sometimes we get so close to situations and struggles that it's too hard for us to see the bigger picture. I do it, you do it, we all do. Okay? So it's not a shameful thing to seek advice or seek counsel or seek professional help. Because sometimes it is an opportunity for somebody else to say, hey, can we just take a minute? This is what I see happening. Is this true or not true? And then you can kind of go from there. So, identify realistic and unrealistic expectations in your relationship. Have that real conversation with your spouse. And it may be that right now, because everybody is home, kids, parents, everybody, maybe you have to set that time aside. Maybe you have to say, you know what, tonight at 8:30, can we have this conversation? Because I really feel like this is a struggle in our relationship right now. It's okay. Set that time aside, because it is far better to have the conversation and as an opportunity to actually draw closer together than it is to not have the conversation. So if you have to set it aside, set it aside. Make it a special opportunity to really focus and grow your relationship together. So have that real conversation, and then seek advice and counsel and professional help. Do not be afraid to do so. All right, and then finally, again, I encourage you to visit my website, journeydiscipleship.squarespace.com. Like and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Journey Disciple. And that's where you'll catch a lot of new videos, new posts, new opportunities, new events coming up. So be sure to like and follow me on social media as well. If this video has had any impact on you, or helped you think differently, or maybe changed your perspective a little bit, or really helped line up your perspective on centering your marriage, I would invite you to share this video. Share it with your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, whoever, and let's encourage and build each other up as the body of Christ. All right? Thanks, guys.